Every day holds a story. Let's rewind. This is Today Rewound. 4 dead in Ohio. 4 futures stolen. One moment America could never forget. May 4th, 1970. Spring was in full bloom at Kent State University. Students walked between classes, worried about finals, and made weekend plans, just like any other Monday on this Midwestern campus. Allison Krause was a 19-year-old honors student with a passion for peace activism and art. Jeffrey Miller, 20, had recently transferred to Kent State, partly to join the growing anti-war movement. Sandra Schauer, 20, a speech therapy major, was known for her vibrant smile and dedication to helping hearing-impaired children. William Schroeder, 19, was an ROTC psychology student with plans for military service after graduation. By noon, all 4 would be dead on the grounds of Kent State University. To understand what happened at Kent State, we need to feel America in 1970. The country was being torn apart. Vietnam had claimed over 50,000 American lives. The military draft loomed over young men, and on April 30th, President Nixon made an announcement that would ignite a firestorm. U.S. troops would expand operations into Cambodia, a clear escalation of a war he had promised to wind down. That weekend, campuses erupted in fury. But what made Kent State different? Why here? Friday, May 1st. Students gathered downtown for what began as peaceful, constitutionally protected demonstrations. By nightfall, tensions escalated. Windows were broken, police moved in with tear gas. Saturday night, the campus ROTC building was set ablaze. The air filled with smoke and shouts as flames consumed the wooden structure. One student, Terry Strube, watched from his dorm window, later recalling, "It felt like the whole world was on fire that night." To this day, no one knows who started the fire. The Scranton Commission, which later investigated the events, found no conclusive evidence about who was responsible. Some theories suggest it might not have even been students, but possibly outside agitators or provocateurs. No one was ever charged with the arson. Sunday, May 3rd. Ohio Governor James Rhodes, facing a tough primary election just 2 days away, saw political opportunity. At a press conference held in Kent, using inflammatory language that would prove tragically consequential, Rhodes called the protesters worse than the brown shirts and the communist element, the worst type of people that we harbor in America. "We're going to eradicate the problem. We're not going to treat the symptoms," Rhodes declared, promising to use every force of law against the students. His words, likely calculated to boost his law and order image before Tuesday's election, effectively painted American students as enemies of the state, a characterization that would echo in the minds of the National Guard as they deployed to campus. What few knew then, and many don't realize now, is that these guardsmen were mostly young men themselves, many just 18 or 19. They had been on duty for nearly a week at a truckers' strike in Akron, working grueling 12-hour shifts with little rest. Some of the guardsmen were barely older than the students they now faced, equally scared, confused, and caught in forces beyond their control. Many had minimal training for civil disturbances. More troubling, rumors circulated among them that radical students had stockpiled weapons on campus, completely false information that may have been intentionally spread, according to historian William Gordon, to justify the military presence. These young soldiers arrived primed to see threats where none existed. By Monday morning, an uneasy calm settled over Kent State University. Classes resumed, but a rally was planned for noon on the Commons, partly to protest the Guards' presence on campus. Approximately 2,000 people gathered. This is crucial to understand. Many weren't protesters at all. Some were simply curious. Others were walking between classes, watching from a distance. Even those actively protesting were exercising their constitutional right to peacefully assemble, a right enshrined in the very Constitution these guardsmen had sworn to protect. When the rally was ordered to disperse, some students refused. Tear gas was fired. Some protesters threw rocks and tear gas canisters back toward the guard. The soldiers advanced across the Commons, pushing students up and over Blanket Hill and toward a practice football field. The air was thick with tear gas. Shouts echoed across campus. Guardsmen shifted uneasily, their rifles gleaming under the noon sun as confusion spread through their ranks. They reached the practice field, seemed to find themselves at a dead end, and then, unexpectedly, turned and retreated back up the hill. And then, at 12:24 p.m., time seemed to stop at Kent State University. Without clear orders and for reasons that multiple investigations would never fully resolve, 28 guardsmen turned in unison. Some witnesses later reported seeing Sergeant Myron Pryor raise his pistol first, possibly triggering others to follow suit. Some knelt, taking aim at the students below. And then they fired. 67 bullets in 13 seconds. Students who seconds earlier had been shouting slogans were now screaming for ambulances. Through the chaos and smoke, 4 bodies lay still on the ground. The closest was nearly 300 feet away from the guardsmen. None posed any threat to the soldiers' lives. Allison Krauss fell 343 feet from the guardsman. She had been active in the protests and reportedly put a flower in a guardsman's rifle barrel the day before, saying, "Flowers are better than bullets." Jeffrey Miller, 265 feet away, whose body would become the center of the iconic photograph that shocked the world. Sandra Shire, 390 feet from the guard, wasn't protesting at all. She was walking to her speech therapy class when a bullet severed her jugular vein. She had been helping deaf children learn to communicate just hours earlier. William Schroeder, 382 feet away, an ROTC student himself, had stopped only to observe out of curiosity. He was carrying his textbooks when he was shot. The raw anguish captured in the photograph of 14-year-old runaway Mary Ann Vecchio kneeling over Jeffrey Miller's body would become the visual embodiment of America's internal wounds. It appeared on front pages nationwide the next morning. Kent State University closed immediately. By week's end, over 4 million students had walked out of classes, closing hundreds of campuses nationwide in the only nationwide student strike in U.S. history. Here's something most people don't realize. While President Nixon publicly called the Kent State shootings a tragedy, White House recordings later revealed he privately referred to the victims as bums and blamed them for their own deaths. This stark disconnect between public sympathy and private contempt perfectly captured the political divisions tearing America apart. Before Kent State, Americans were deeply divided on Vietnam protests, with many viewing demonstrators as radical troublemakers. After Kent State, public opinion shifted dramatically. The President's Commission on Campus Unrest would later conclude, "The Kent State tragedy must mark the last time that loaded rifles are issued as a matter of course to guardsmen confronting student demonstrators." The cultural impact was immediate and intense. Neil Young wrote, "Ohio," within days of seeing the photographs, and Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young rushed it to release within weeks, one of the fastest-produced protest songs in history. Radio stations across America played it, despite its controversial message. Kent State University fundamentally changed how authorities respond to protests in America. Law enforcement agencies developed new protocols emphasizing de-escalation. National Guard units received new training specifically designed to prevent such tragedies. The bloodshed at Kent State became a cautionary tale, taught in police and military academies about the dangerous mix of weapons, exhaustion, and political rhetoric. The university itself struggled for decades with how to memorialize the events. Parking lots were built near the shooting site. Memorials were proposed and rejected. It wasn't until 1990, 20 years later, that a proper memorial was dedicated. 4 granite pylons now stand in the meadow where the students fell, with the simple plea carved in stone: inquire, learn, reflect. In 2013, Kent State University finally embraced its difficult legacy by opening the May 4 Visitors Center, ensuring new generations understand what happened that spring day. 3 years later, the site was designated a National Historic Landmark, permanently protecting the ground where American citizens fell to American bullets. The questions raised that day still haunt us. What constitutes legitimate protest? When does government response cross the line from maintaining order to suppressing dissent? How do we balance security against freedom of expression? The 13 seconds of gunfire at Kent State force us to confront these questions anew with each generation. Every year on May 4th, a candlelight vigil winds through Kent State University, retracing the path where students fled from their own countrymen's bullets. At 12:24 p.m., a bell tolls 13 times, once for each second of gunfire. Then, 4 names are read, followed by a painful silence. 4 dead in Ohio. 4 futures stolen. But their voices and the lessons learned echo still. On this day in 1970, a campus protest became a national reckoning, a moment when America was forced to look in the mirror and confront difficult truths about itself. The images from that day continue to haunt us, not as distant history, but as a stark reminder that the freedoms we cherish remain fragile, even on American soil. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of Kent State is this question. In a nation founded on protest and dissent, how do we ensure that voices of opposition can be heard without fear that speaking out might be met with deadly force? The answers we find will determine what kind of country we become.